What's up, everybody? Sorry for the delay. Haven't been uploading my tournament games as of late. Just ran into some snag with the holidays, but we're back. Plan to be recording these right after I play each tournament just to get them on the site or on my channel. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you like this. Continuing my series where I'm going for at least 2,000 USCF. I'm about 1870 going into this tournament. Still feel pretty underrated, where I'm very close. I'm very close to beating a bunch of high-rated players. I've definitely fallen apart in some winning positions. But what I've done is I've recently started actually training on my chess again, which, chess is hard. So if you're not working on your chess, how can you expect to have success? Because I've been playing a lot of weekend tournaments, but I've not actively been training. And so what I'm doing for my training includes both includes physical training where I'm just out of shape, I'm not overweight or anything, but my VO2 max, my fitness levels, they're just not that great. And if you're going to be good at chess, you need to be in shape physically, especially as you get older, which, I'm 32, so I classify as older compared to the young 24, 14-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 16-year-olds. When I was ascending as a chess player, I was 26. That was 6 years ago. So what I'm doing is I'm doing physical exercise every day. And what I'm trying to do is I'm doing 30-minute of puzzles Monday through Friday. So not a lot, not a lot of training, but at least doing that, trying to improve my tactical vision, try to stay sharp. And I try to do that right after I work out to try to simulate the idea that I am tired. Try to simulate the idea of being tired during a chess tournament. The tournament I care most about every year is coming up. That is US Amateur Team East up in New Jersey. It's a team tournament, which is really fun. It's very unique. I highly recommend any chess players out there play if they never have. There's US Amateur Team East, Team North, Team South, Team West. And the idea is that your team average has to be 2,200 or below. So it's an amateur tournament, obviously. And I play with the same group of guys I play with every year, where some guys I used to teach chess with in New York City. And I want to be in shape for that because I'm board 4 as the lowest rated member of our team. And so it's important for our team's success for me to do well. And so I'm getting in shape. I'm doing the training. I'm feeling it paying off. Anyways, that brings us to this tournament. Sometimes I do my analysis on chess.com, sometimes on Lee Chess. We're doing Lee Chess until we get picked up and sponsored, just because that's where I put my games into. And this tournament is a 3-day or 2-day schedule, 5 rounds. I'm playing in the master section as one of the lower rated players because I always try to play the strongest players I can when the option is there. Just feel like that's the quickest way to get better. And I don't feel like I'm far off. And in round, the time control for the slow games are game 90 with a 30-second delay. They are FIDE rated as well. Usually game 90 with a 30-second increment is the slowest they do, but it's delay for this makes the games go a little bit quick. Anyways, I'm doing the 3-day schedule, game on Friday, round 1 here against Lubo, who, this is really funny, Lubo goes to the same club as me in St. Pete. I play him all the time. I've literally played him probably 13 to 15 times in the past year. And ironically, I've had white only 2 or 3 times of those times. And again, drove all the way to Orlando, 3 hours, playing Friday night at 7 p.m. And I am playing Lubo in round 1. Ideally, I would have played someone else just to get a different experience, but it is what it is. So moving us forward here, he plays d4. And I play knight f6, bishop f4. So he's playing the London. We've played a lot of games where he plays c4, he plays h4, but those games haven't gone for so well for him as of late. So I wasn't surprised to see something else from him. I play g6, knight f3, bishop g7. We're both developing pieces. e3, castles, knight d7 or knight bd2. d6, taking away the e5 square, either going to expand with e5 or c5, 2 pawn breaks. H3, giving his bishop a retreating square against the move knight h5, where, if instead I could play knight h5, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, and I could win the bishop. h3 and c5, striking at the center. He plays c3, reinforcing his center. I play knight c6, developing my knight, again attacking the center. Bishop c4 and queen b6, where I put pressure on d4 and b2. And here he plays queen b3, offsetting my queen. And I had, before I played queen b6, I thought about queen b3, and I thought I simply play knight a5, kind of forcing the trade of queens. And yes, this doubles my pawns, but it also gives me the open a file. My knight's attacking the bishop. I would love to trade the knight for the bishop. And so I'm feeling good. And he plays bishop b5. I play bishop d7, offsetting the bishop. Thought about different moves here. I thought about knight d5, bishop h2 hitting the bishop, knight c7 hitting the bishop, and then bishop d3. And I figured, what have I really achieved here? His bishop is awesome here, sees all the board. My knight on c7 is loose. It's not protected and might run into issues one day if my d-pawn moves. So I decided that's not the best path. I went with bishop d7. And I thought he should play something like bishop d3 here. Again, holding on to his good bishop. His bishop not on the same squares as his pawns. But he traded. He told me in the game he was looking at a4, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight c4, exclam, with the point being rook a8 can be met with rook a8. And if you, and I'm threatening rook a1, skewering, and I'm also hitting b2. Wasn't really on my radar. But I took with the F knight, and he plays d5, taking away the c6 square from my knight. And I played c4, where my knight reinforces this pawn, and my knight is wanting to go into the square c5. So I'm creating a square for my knight. Strong players think about what squares their pieces want. My knight on c5 would be a beautiful piece. It's maybe going to jump into d3. So I kind of thought I was better at this point, and this d-pawn can be worse. Even better from the engine was something like b5, which makes a lot of sense. I try to plan a knight here, and that knight is very annoying, attacking b2. And you can't really ever play anything like b3, keeping my knight out because of the bishop's pressure on this diagonal. But I played c4, castles, knight c5. b4 is a move I have to constantly be aware of, forking my pieces, but it would fail to something like takes on passant, takes, and I can take the c-pawn, where you don't get to fork my pieces. Castles, knight c5, rook b1. So already I'm feeling better. The rook is passive. Again, b4 is an idea. I jumped the knight into d3, where I hit the bishop. The bishop went to g5. I had seen that the bishop could go to g5, and it's a little bit annoying. So I'd thought about playing h6 earlier. But I simply played rook fe8, defending the pawn. Rook d1, h6, hitting the bishop. Bishop h4, and b5, reinforcing, because white was threatening something like, if I just play a random move, he was threatening something like knight takes c4, perhaps, where when I take back, he removed the protection of my pawn. And so that's why I go for b5. He plays knight f1, challenging my knight, and I play knight c5. Rook c1, and all his pieces are kind of tied down. I definitely felt better. I played knight a4, again putting pressure here, and perhaps giving my knight the b6 square. He played knight f3, and I played f5. And the reason why I played f5 is if I just go for knight b6, he's going to play e4. defending the pawn. But instead, I play f5, and this also sets up a trap where if white can blunder here, which he said he almost did in the game, with something like e4 and f4, where now I'm threatening g5 and the bishop is trapped and there's nothing you can do about this, right? g3, g5, takes, and I'm winning a piece for a couple pawns. But after f5, he plays bishop g3, which I thought he could, I thought he needed to just pacify here and play something like knight f1. So knight b6 can be met with rook d1. The engine also agrees with me. Right? But at least he's defending things. I'm still better here, but it's a game. He plays g3 though, knight b6, e4. I take, the knight takes, and I take on d5. So I have won a clean pawn. And again, Lubo's around 2100, and my USCF is currently around 1870. But again, I always play Lubo close, so I mean, I'm already better here as black. Things are going great, but it's not quite easy. My opponent plays rook d1, and I thought a while here. I also have a bit of a time advantage. I'm thinking between knight f6, knight c7, and knight b6. Originally, my intention was knight f6, but then white can trade and then play rook d5, and they're going to win the b pawn because I can't defend it. Maybe I can play something like b4, and things get crazy. And I thought about knight c7, and I looked at a line that went something like d4, e5, knight takes d6, takes. Or no, sorry. After takes, I have to take with the knight, and he takes. And this is, I have 2 knights for the rook, which is considered better for black. He has 6 pawns, and I have 5, though. But I thought I was like, I'm just up a clean pawn, so why welcome these complications? Engine does like me. And then eventually, I did play the best move, which is knight b6, keeping the knight out of d5. And, long term, I want to put the rook on d8. I want to play e5. I want to play d5. I want to play d4. And I want to get these pawns rolling and kicked into his position. He plays a3, and I jump my knight into b3. He plays h4, and I play rook d8. I was thinking for a while about d5 against knight d2, trading, and then playing e5. Where I'm getting my pawns rolling against something like knight f3. Maybe preparing d4 with rook d8 or something. And knight c5, which I thought was maybe annoying, can't be played obviously because my knight covers it in this position. So but I did play rook d8. I just figured it was safe. Why not? And then he drops his other knight into d2. I ended up trading, and then I play rook c8. And the reason why I played rook c8 is I want to play d5, but bishop c7 seems annoying, and knight c5 also seems annoying. And so instead, I play rook c8, f3, d5, kicking the knight, because the knight was threatening to be trapped. It has no squares right now. d5, knight f2, e5, rook e1, rook d8, and then knight g5. And I realized right after I played rook d8 that he could play knight g4. And so, I think I should be playing h5 here, just taking away the square from the knight. The knight's not a very good piece right now. And then I can play rook d8 and go forward with my plan of d4 in all likelihood. But even after knight g5, I'm like, okay, got to play d4. Engine still thinks I'm much better here. He takes, and here I took on c3, which is okay. Engine's top move is d3. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to take advantage of this, but I do understand it now. I took on c3, and I'm still better. Rook takes on c3, knight a4, top move. Where, white has these weak pawns, and if they're not careful, coupled with my bishop, my knight, my rook, these guys are going to get going. And here he plays rook e3, and I didn't find the best move here. I'm a little stressed, obviously. It's a night game. I'm tired. I started physically training this past week kind of hard, so I wasn't really surprised I was tired. I think that will improve over time. So pause this video if you would like to try to find the best move. What I played was rook d1 check, invading. The top move is bishop f8, where, you can take on g5, but then you would lose the game to bishop c5. And I'm also threatening your a pawn. I'm threatening to get to c5 anyways. And yeah, the bishop just does a great job on f8. So that's an opportunity I missed. I checked, and I knew it's risky to check the king and go for these pawns. But on the lower rated player, I've been better the whole game pretty much. And I decided I'm playing for the win, right? Like, I'm playing for the win. If I lose, so be it. Everyone who's lower rated, when you play someone higher rated, it might feel bad when you lose, but in general, you are incentivized to go for the win. And here I played g5 because I saw he could take and then play h5. So I said, okay, I might as well hold on to the pawn and then go for rook a1, rook takes a3, and how does he stop that? And he plays h5, and I play rook a1. So I know things like I'm either getting mated here, or I might have to settle for a draw, or I'm winning because this rook's getting in. I abandoned my back rank, so I knew I was getting kind of risky. I took on a3. He checked me. I played king h7, not king f7 because of rook e7, which is also probably okay. But then they take this pawn with check after. So I played king h7. My bishop is guarding mate right now. He plays rook e7, threatening bishop e5. I play king g7, rook e8, king f7, rook e7, king g8, rook takes b7. And I'd kind of resigned that he was going to do the repetition here, and it was going to end in a draw, and that's kind of disappointing because, I'm so close to winning. But I took on c3 here, trying to get these guys going. And here he checks me, and here I blunder. So pause the video. There's only one move that holds it together for black. I blundered with king f8. I don't know what was happening here. It just wasn't even thinking. I knew that things were kind of bad after king f7 and king f8, right? Because against king f7, they can play something like knight f5, where they are double attacking the knight, so your king can move and they take your bishop with check. And maybe even this and getting something going was better than what happened in the game. I played king f8, which runs into bishop d6, and all sorts of issues are happening. But the balance is held after not king h7 due to knight f5, and you are pinned and losing your bishop, but king h8. And yeah, there's no real way for white to make progress. Best they can do is kind of check me, and we go back and forth. And if they try to make any improving moves, I'm going to get these pawns rolling and they're going to lose. So disappointing here. I did blunder with king f8, and it's all over now. He plays knight f5, threatening bishop d6. Rook b3 is played by me, giving up the bishop. I'm just hoping that I can get this guy going. These guys can work together. Bishop d6 anyways. King e8. Knight takes check. King d8. Knight check. King c8. Rook c7. King b8. Takes with check. King a8. And we played a couple more moves, but I went on to lose this game. So first game of the tournament started with a loss by me. I'm happy with how I played in this game. For most part of it, I missed a couple killer opportunities. I was definitely outplaying him in a slow time control as white, as the guy who's rated, 1, 2 to 300 points below. And so there's a lot of promising takeaways. Obviously, not playing, even a draw would have been disappointing for me just because I felt I was much better and I was better. Like I won a clean pawn, but it is what it is. I started with a loss, and you have the option to re-entering the tournament and playing the 2-day schedule, which is 3 rounds Saturday, with the first 2 rounds being game 60. And then you merge into the 3-day schedule. They combine. And then you play a game Saturday night and 2 games Sunday. And I ended up re-entering for a couple reasons. Number one, I was already there. Number two, as one of the lower rated guys, if I did lose my next game, now I might be forced to take a bye. And number three, I figured I might as well play more chess. And I knew I would get to play some higher rated players by re-entering. And I'm pretty happy I did. So we re-entered. And I'm sure if I had beaten Lubo, he would have re-entered as well. So I re-entered, and now, so it's like I hadn't played the tournament at all. It's going to get rated all as one tournament. So I ended up playing 6 rounds in this tournament, even though it's a 5-round tournament. So in the second day, I am playing a player by the name of Arav Patel with the white pieces. He's around 2150. Again, I'm 1870. D4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop e2, castles, bishop e3. I hadn't really played this setup that much. I have familiarized myself more about it after this game, but I went with e5, striking at the center, d5, keeping it closed, gaining space. A5 is a pretty normal move where you go knight a6, knight c5, and you don't want your knight kicked by b4. And then he plays g4, clearly threatening to play stuff like g5, threatening to stuff to play like h4, h5. He's trying to storm me. I play knight a6, g5, and knight e8, which is a mistake. You're supposed to go to d7, I think, so your knights can go to c5 and support each other. But I went to e8. He played h4, and here I played f5, where, if you just go forward with your plan, I'm going to play f4 and shut a lot of things down. And if you take on passant like you did, I originally intended to take back with the knight. But, I thought stuff like bishop g5 was annoying, pinning me. And then obviously h5 is a move that's coming, trying to rip open my king. And so I settled on bishop takes f6, where this bishop's a pretty bad piece right now, hemmed in by my pawns. It's a bad bishop with the pawns on center squares. And I thought stuff against like h5, I could play bishop g5, trying to trade off white's good bishop with his pawns on light squares. And I thought this was okay. Engine did like knight takes f6 better, though. He goes forward with h5. g5 was another thought of mine, but, against h6, this pawn won't have any pawns protecting it. This is what the engine wanted me to do. I could play king h8, rook g8, and I guess just defend, but it doesn't seem like a fun position. This piece is terrible. I don't really see much active play for me. So I went bishop g5, and he took on g6, and here I thought for 10 minutes or so. The obvious thing to do is to take back on g6, and then the game could have continued queen d2, queen takes e3, queen takes e3, queen f6, and something like queen h6 perhaps, where he's trying to checkmate me. I guess he can't play queen h6 right away because I have pressure on f2. But, the idea is that my queen's going to like park itself on g7 and kind of act like a bishop defending my king. And yeah, it's kind of scary with just one pawn in front of your king. But this would have been okay. But, I figured I'm just kind of like a little worse here. And so I ended up, instead of taking on g6, I ended up taking on d3 because I had calculated that after takes on h7, which he did in game. And he thought for a long while here. I play king h8. And the point is, this pawn is kind of my best friend, where it's stopping the rook from seeing my king. It's acting as a shield. And after takes on e3, nothing else to do, I have this move queen g5, where I both threaten the e pawn and I threaten G2. And again, this guy's 2150, higher rated than me. So, like I want to attack him. I don't want him comfortable. And yeah, he ended up making mistakes here. I thought the two main things I calculated after Queen G5 was either Queen D2 or D2 or King D2. And I thought King D2 was White's best move, where I thought I could do Queen G2, where I hit the rook, and then something like Rook H4 must be played. And I have all sorts of great ideas here with like Rook F2 coming, the knight coming to B4 or C5, this knight coming to F6, putting pressure on E4, bishop G4 maybe, pinning this bishop. And yeah, like I thought I would just kind of be better here. The rook's kind of awkward. This is definitely not a position he's played a lot, so he wouldn't be comfortable. Turns out White has some crazy line here after King D2 and Queen G2, which is Knight F3. And I thought this move couldn't be played, and obviously my opponent didn't either, which I take the knight because it's pinned to the king. And then White can play Rook G1. And if I play like Queen F2, he plays Rook G8 check. I take on H7. He plays Queen G1 exclam, trading queens. He takes here. And apparently I am just worse here with this rook being attacked. And I think the issue for me is that, like he's going to retreat this rook and try to mate me. So like, I don't know, Rook F, and also this knight's being attacked. And so, like Rook F6 or something, defending against eventual mates. He takes here. My rook is pinned. So this was crazy. Material is equal here, but yeah, I mean, Engine has White as like +2. And I think this is a very hard and unintuitive line to see. Again, we're playing game 60 right now, delay 5. So a much faster time control. Because it's not intuitive to be down a bishop and then say, let's trade queens, right? So you had to see pretty far to see that. He did think for a long while. Against Queen D2, I thought I would have first insert the check, taking away castling rights, King D1 forced, and then I would go for Queen G2. And again, and now I'm attacking both these pieces, and I thought, White's in trouble. They have to play something like Bishop F3, and the game gets kind of crazy after something like this. But he went for Knight F3. And I thought his idea was take on E3, and then he's trying to get in Knight H4 and Knight G6, checking my king, making my king move, and getting to promote the H-pawn. But here he played Queen D2, which I thought, like I saw from afar, you can't do this. This is just a blunder. So pause your clock if you don't see the tactic and you want to find the tactic. But the tactic is simply rook takes F3 exclam, where the bishop is pinned to the king. And he trades queens. I take, the bishop still pinned. And here he plays King D2. And here I'm just up a clean piece. And I was like, okay. So like he blundered, I'm winning. What's crazy is the engine has this as like -0.2. So no, not winning. And what he said after the game is that he thought he could play King F2 and my rook is trapped and I have to sack it for a piece, which still would be good for me, I thought. But he didn't see that I could play Rook H3 defending by the bishop. And so King D2, I do end up going H3. I think for a while I'm thinking about G3 too. But Rook H3, trades are obviously good for me. And I thought White's best move here was Rook F1, which the engine also agrees with me. And the issue here is he's threatening to win this knight right now with Rook F8. And stuff like Knight G7 runs into, a check. And then he can like pin me and go here and try to win the knight. And rook, if I ever take with the rook, I just get mated after Rook F8. So yeah, Rook F1 was the much better move, but he plays Rook G1, which is just a blunder because I played Knight F6. I get to deal with that issue. My knight covers here. My knight's going to take on H7, and now I'm just significantly winning against a 2150. So yeah, I mean, this game is going awesome. And I think I'm gonna need to like grind here, but I think I'm gonna go on to win this game. And so he plays rook g6, attacking my knight. I calculate for a while before I take on h7, because again, I want to make sure I'm not losing after stuff like rook g1, threatening rook g8. So I take on h7. He plays a3 because we both know I want to play bishop d7 and then knight c5. And he's going to play something like rook g7. And if I play knight c5, bishop d7, b4 with his rook on g7, my knight needs to move, which was protecting the bishop, and he could win the bishop. So I do play bishop d7 because I need, after rook g1, which threatens checkmate, I need this rook to cover checkmate. So he goes for rook g1, and I play rook f8, getting the rook on the open f file and getting it out of the path of the bishop, where the bishop can now go to e8 or c8, and I don't get mated on g8. He plays king d1, random move to me, knight f6, rook f1, okay, I have to go back, rook g1, and now I play bishop e8, making progress in the position. He plays rook g7, I play knight f6 now. The knight on a6 doing a beautiful job of protecting c7. King c1, again, he's just waiting. And rook g8. I could trade rooks many ways here. I could also play rook h1, where you take me with check and I take on g7. But I decided just to play rook g8. This rook's probably a little bit better as an active piece, and it covers my king from checks. So takes, I take with the knight. Bishop g4, rook f4, where this is like the new 7th rank to me, and I might be able to put pressure on e4 with moves like knight c5. King d2, knight f6, hitting the bishop. Bishop f5, knight c5, attacking e4 again. Rook e3, and bishop d7, trying to trade pieces because I'm winning. He plays knight g6. We're both in really low time now. And here I play knight g4, check. I thought like something like king f3 was his best try. And he kind of surprises me where he trades. I take with the rook, obviously, with the bishop protecting it. He trades again. So he decides to just trade into an endgame, down a clean piece. And I'm like, okay, awesome. I'm going to go on to win. He plays knight b5, attacking c7, and I play knight a6, defending my only real weakness. He goes back. I play bishop d7, taking away this diagonal. I'm in no rush. Knight b1, knight c5, improving my knight. b4, takes, knight a6, hitting the unprotected pawn. b5, now my knight goes to c5, and you can't play that anymore. Knight c3, king g7, king f3, and I play b6, just taking away any ideas of him ever playing b6 himself. b6, king e3, king f6, king f3, bishop e8, where my bishop is both either going to take away this diagonal or it's going to come here. The knight can no longer go to b5. Bishop h5, taking away squares. Knight b1, king g5, knight d2, bishop d1, where I want to get in and get one of these guys. Knight f1, king g4. I'm just trying to shut the knight out. Knight h2, king g3, knight f1, king g2, knight d2, bishop c2, and now he must drop a pawn. And so I take, he plays knight g5, and the only, I just have to worry about him getting in here. And so I end up playing bishop g6, where the knight has no squares forward covered by my pieces. He must go back. So he goes to f3. I go to king g3. I've won the pawn. King e1, king g4, knight f3. And my notation kind of stops here. But, I mean, what happens is, and I'm going to cut to an image from the game. I mean, the absolute tragedy. So I'm outplaying the 2100, 2150 the whole game. I think I play something like bishop b4, knight d2, bishop c2, knight f3. He doesn't really have many squares, but I'm low on time. So is he. I stopped notating, and eventually we reach this position where this piece is a bishop, this is a king. Here's my 4 pawns. Here's his 3 pawns. Here's the knight. I have 30 seconds, and so does he. And in this position, obviously knight b2 wins the game on the spot because his king can't go to d3 or d4 due to my bishop and the pawn. And I'm going to go knight b2. I'm going to win the d pawn. And once the d pawn, he might have even resigned after that. I win the d pawn, and then I win all the other pawns, and then I just push my pawns, and eventually I would win this game. But tragically here, I played knight c5, which is a fine move on the surface. However, kudos to my opponent because with him only having 1 minute on the clock, he kept on notating even though I stopped. And knight c5 ended up being 3-move repetition, which was not on my radar at all due to me playing. Like, I played different moves. I had moved the king, I had moved the bishop, I had moved the knight. But knight c5 did end up being 3-move repetition. He's like, okay, I think that's 3-move. I was like, no, definitely not. We got the arbiter. The arbiter has a little handheld computer thing. We put in all the moves. His notation wasn't even correct, where unfortunately we needed to use my notation to force 3-move on me in a winning position. And yeah, he was right. So big kudos to him. It did end up being 3-move repetition. Absolutely tragic for me. Another, at least I didn't lose, but I threw away a half point here. Knight b2, I end up going on to win. Even e4, I end up going on to win. Where, my knight can now go into like d3 and everything. So terrible. I could even sack both my pieces for his with me having a pawn where I could shield out his king and eventually win this game. So really, really, really annoying. Just so annoying. I wasn't like mad. I was just super annoyed, as anyone would be, where you're winning, you're crushing. And yeah, I guess I just panicked with 30 seconds because what was going through my head is, I don't know why I didn't think about knight b2. I can literally only go to a couple squares. I had just jumped from c3 to a4. Obviously, if I look at knight b2 for even, I was just like, okay, don't flag. Like that's the only thing. But he kept on notating, which I usually stop below 5 minutes, which is the rules. But what I thought is, okay, I'll go to c5, and then I'll spend some more time thinking, and then I'll figure out the winning plan. And yeah, just tragedy. Ended in a draw. Is what it is. Disappointing. But, 2 games by me against 2,100 competition with the black pieces. And honestly, I was in position to win both. So close yet so far, but still I'm happy with the overall quality of my play, even though that is a terrible blunder. In round 2, this is the last game 60 game. The rest are game 90, delay 30. I got to play a woman grandmaster, which is pretty awesome. This is the first grandmaster I've played in a classical game. A woman grandmaster is not quite the same strength as a grandmaster, but still very cool. Her name is Jennifer. I played c4, e6, g3, d5, bishop g2, knight f6, knight f3, and d4. And yeah, this is kind of annoying. I had seen like a Fabiano Caruana game where he plays like b4 or something here, and I don't know. It'd been a little bit since I looked at it, so I think maybe the idea is like takes, and you get pressure here. I don't really know. But now I'm going to force to play like a Benoni where I put my pawn on d3, which is fine. But maybe I should just be playing d4 here just to take away the possibility of black doing that. Something for me to think about. But knight f3, d4, castles, c5, e3, knight c6, takes on d4, takes on d4, and d3. So getting the half open e-file for me. She has space in the center. And here she plays h5, stopping bishop g5. I play bishop f4, perhaps planning to do something like knight e5. Bishop d6, trade pieces, which is not really a trade I want to do because it brings the queen into the game and my pawns are on light squares, but kind of had to. And then a3, which I knew a3 she would play a5. And I thought I thought this was kind of clever where the idea is for me to play a4. And if I just play, like a4 right away, or if I just go for knight a3 right away, trying to get into knight b5, she's going to play a6, which maybe I could play knight c2 and b4, and that would have been better. But I thought this was kind of clever. I play a3, she plays a5, and I play a4. And now my knight has an outpost square on b5. And the knight, so does she on b4, but it's not quite as good because mine attacks the queen at least. She castles. I played knight a3, e5, knight b5, queen c5, rook e1, bishop f5. And here I thought for a bit with the main line I was calculating was knight d2, bishop takes b3, knight b3, queen takes c4, rook c1, queen takes a4, queen takes d3, winning the bishop. But then I thought, okay, knight b4, hitting my queen, and she's going to dislodge my queen from winning one of these. She's going to win back the knight, and she already won a couple pawns. And I guess I just missed that I could play, I just kind of missed that I could play queen c4 here because I forgot the knight interfered. So I don't think she would have gone down this line because this is much better for white. But yeah, I just missed something. And so what I noticed and what I thought I did instead was I thought I was really clever. And this move's okay, but not as good as just going knight d2. Is I thought, okay, I enter with b4 first. And the point is she pretty much has to take with the pawn. And now I do knight d2, the same thing. And the point is, if you take, I play knight b3, rook, if we go down the same line, I thought, now her queen can't, these knights are defended. She can't get to a4. My queen's going to win the bishop. She has to play like queen e6. I take here, and I've won the piece. So I thought b4 was a clever move. But yeah, knight d2 was just better because, again, I missed something. She takes on b4, knight d2, rook d8, knight b3, and she thought for a long while before rook d8. And she plays queen f8, retreating her queen. And, my loose plans here were stuff like c5, knight d6, getting a knight in her position, creating squares for my pieces. But I did knight c7, rook c8, and knight d5 with the idea that if you take my knight, I win the e-pawn and hit your bishop, and your d-pawn is weak. So she plays knight d7, and I play a5, both taking away the b6 square, giving myself the b6 square, and perhaps planning to play a6 and rook takes a6. And this she can't move this knight right now, or this pawn drops. Her knight goes here, so it does defend e5. So I play a5, knight b8, and I'm playing a WGM. She's rated like 2280 or so. And I'm like, well, I'm kind of dictating the action. My knight is better than hers. My bishop is awesome. I am down this pawn, but it's like it's a doubled pawn, isolated. So I'm kind of feeling better here. And I play queen d2, which is not the best move. Pause your clock if you want to look for it. White has a couple moves that are fine. All of them are fine. But the best, I think, is knight takes d4, a tactic I missed, and so did she, I think. With the point being, if you take on e5, I have knight e7 check. And after the king moves, you pick back up the bishop. The d-pawn is weak. You've won a center pawn. Your bishop is awesome. Even though the computer says this is fine for black, I think practically this is better for white. So a tactic I missed. I did play queen d2 with the idea of winning the b pawn back. She plays knight a6. And here I blunder with rook a4. Again, you can go for knight takes d4. You have other ideas as well. f4. with the same tactic, knight e7. And I'd seen knight e7. I just didn't try to make it work enough. Maybe I was still thinking about the last game. So I played rook a4, knight c5, and I thought this was fine for me because I thought, I had looked at this obviously, but I had thought that, knight takes, rook takes b4, and I get in here, and this looks awesome. But then I noticed, she can go d3. So I didn't go deep enough in this line. And maybe even this would have been fine. I think this is worse for white where you're down the exchange and down a pawn. But at least you're making them think about something. Their e-pawn is dropping there. So I don't know. But I played rook a4, knight c5. I did trade. And again, same thing if I take on b4. So here I take on e5. She takes my rook, and I took her bishop. She had thought this was better, but it's all worse for white now. So I took on f5, and at least like I have attacking ideas. It's not quite working. I can't make knight f6 work. I can't make rook f6 work. I'm trying. I'm looking at it, but it just doesn't quite work. She plays b3, and I realize I'm in trouble because this pawn that I gave her is now annoying. It's pretty fast. And so knight b6 kind of forced by me. Takes. My idea is to play rook b5. She plays rook c5. I play bishop d5. And I knew she was going to sack the exchange, but I mean, what else can you do? I saw bishop d5 doesn't work, but I also knew that this didn't work. Where you're just down the exchange and they're queening. So bishop d5 is the best of the worst, where now you are threatening f7, but she simply sacks the exchange. If you take with the rook, the game would continue. Takes, queen c5, and she's going to play queen c2, push. Like something like, whatever. Queen b2, queen c2, queen takes, push. And yeah, there's just no real way to harass this queen before she gets her queen. And so I took with the pawn, knowing that this also doesn't work because of rook c2, queen d1. I was looking at queen c5, but she played queen c8, doing the same thing, hitting my rook, threatening rook c1. And so I play queen f3. I'm losing. b2, rook takes f2. None of it's working. Promotes. And yeah, the game didn't end or go much longer. I'm trying to get a perpetual, but no real shot with her having queens protecting everything. And so I did lose this game. So after 3 rounds, after the first day, really my second day, I did have half a point out of 3 games. Oh, no, sorry. This was only round 2. Round 3 is upcoming. So, yeah, I have a half a point out of 2 with me having the terrible draw against the 2150. That should have been a win. And then the loss to the women's grandmaster. But, even though I lost this game, I had her sweating. I played well. And, my position was pretty good. So, not every loss is created equal. I wasn't, blown off the board here. And until I played rook a4, she was really thinking because, my pieces are awesome. Knight b6, by the way, is the other good idea for white with pressure on b7 and maybe even some sacrifices one day. But yeah, missed the tactic with knight takes d4. Can't miss tactics and beat grandmasters. Brings us to round 3. Against a player named Andy Catlin. He's like 2000. I think this was my worst played game. I had prepped a little bit before the game because I noticed he played the Sicilian, or he played e4. But then he surprised me with knight f3. I play knight f6, and he plays b4. And all of a sudden, we're playing a position I've never played before. This is either the Grob opening or the Polish opening. I think it's the Grob. And I did know enough that, like, I think the main line goes like e5, knight takes, bishop takes, where you give up a center pawn, but you get development, and it gets kind of tricky for white. Um, I kind of, if I could go back in this game, I would have played c5, just because I think he maybe plays e4 then, and we get a Sicilian, which I'm trying to practice my Sicilian to be prepared for US Amateur Team East. So that's what I would do if I could go back in time, but you can't go back in time. He played b4, and I decided I'm not going to do the main lines. I'm going to play um, just like a King's Indian setup. Bishop b2, bishop g7, e3, d6, bishop e2, e5, castles, castles, c4, a5, a3, takes, takes, trade rooks, where at least his bishop's unprotected now. Knight e8, trying to get in f5 and trying to pawn storm him. And he plays knight e1, f5, so he has no interest in allowing me to pawn storm him. And I should have thought longer here, where simply like developing the knight to d7 or something is pretty good, just getting your pieces developed. But I went with e4 with the idea that after this trade, okay, I have a bad bishop, but you have a backwards pawn, and you can never really free this backwards pawn, or you're stuck with another backwards pawn on e3. So I thought this was maybe a little bit better for me. Knight c2, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, queen e1, which, yeah, I definitely thought was a step in the wrong direction. I thought he needed to play something like queen a1. So I was happy to see this move. d5, b5, and here I what I originally intended was d4, takes, takes, takes on b7. And I can't take on d2 because then he promotes to a queen, and we reach this position where material's equal, but his queen's really active. Really no sense in playing this, but better would be, which I also looked at, is take the knight, take on b7, and you simply capture back, and then they capture back, and you're down a pawn here, but they have a weak structure, particularly these guys, where, you know, you can like blockade their passed pawns, put your knight on c5, probably put your queen on f6, and this is a game. What I did instead, though, is I played knight a5, which really runs into trouble after takes d5. The other, I also considered knight e7, because what I wanted to do here is knight takes d5, but you can't play knight takes e5 because they play queen a1, where they're both attacking your knight and lining up a check for your king, where if you play something like b6 defending your knight, they take with check, and you can't capture back because you're in check, so you would lose the game like that. So I realized I'm in trouble after knight a5 takes on d5. And I thought for a long time here. Again, we're playing game 90, delay 30 now. And I ended up playing knight b3, at least taking the a1 square away from the queen. He plays bishop c4, a drawback of knight b3, it gives the c4 square. I play knight c5, rerouting my knight. He plays queen e2, which I was very happy to see. I thought queen a1, keeping up pressure like this, was much better. Engine agrees with me. He plays queen e2. And here I played knight d7, and I feel like I'm going to be able to get out of this because he plays knight b4, of course, and I play knight b6, hitting the bishop and hitting the pawn. And my plan is going to be called what they call the bishop wiggle, which is I'm going to, you call this the W or the wiggle, where my bishop's going to go to d7, e8, f7, put pressure on d5, and I'm going to be able to attack this pawn more times than it's being defended, because it's being defended once, twice, 3 times right now. The queen can also join the fun for a max of 4, and I'm going to be able to attack it with both knights, the queen, the rook, and the bishop, which is 5 pieces. So I'm going to be able to win that pawn back by force. So even though I'm in a huge time detriment at this point, like 30 minutes to an hour, my next like 10 moves all were played instantly. Rook b1, queen d6. The reason why I play queen b6 versus bishop d7 is d6 might be annoying for me, where he gets the d5 square for his pieces. So queen d6 blockading the pawn and hitting the knight on b4. Bishop a2, shutting down the a files. Kind of happy to see that. Bishop d7, queen d1, bishop e8, queen c2, bishop f7, rook b2, and rook d8. And so I have achieved what I'm looking for. Now I can take on my convenience. He plays h3 and I play rook d7, with the idea being that when I do all these captures, I don't want the queen capturing on c7 at the end of the lines. And here he plays knight e2 with the idea to get the knight into d4, and that's a little bit annoying for me, but got to grab the pawn now. I take on d5, he takes back, I take with the bishop, he plays knight d4, and I play knight h5, setting up a trap. It's kind of a cheapie, but it's what I did. The cheapie is like, you know, if he just plays whatever, I guess even better would be like, I don't know, if he plays like rook b1, just trying to give him a weighty move. The idea would be bishop takes a2, piece takes on a2, and knight takes f4, where I remove the defender of the knight and win it with check. So that would win a pawn. But I do think I kind of knew this was a cheapie and maybe a step in the wrong direction. Just because the knight's kind of away and my king's kind of weak on these squares. So knight h5 takes, and b6, which was not a move on my radar. So maybe I needed to play something like b6 first, which is not really a move I want to be making, allowing one pawn to control two, because like I'm trying to win this pawn. This pawn's kind of weak. But b6 is an interesting move because if I play c6, I would lose to something like knight takes c6, queen takes c6, or pawn takes c6. Same thing. Takes, and b7. And nothing better to do here than to sack the piece. And I would have a knight versus a rook, and I would go on to lose this game. And if instead I played c5, I was worried about rook b5. And c5 is the top engine move apparently, but queen d6, rook takes c5, you know, or queen takes c5, takes. I guess it wanted me to play something like this. And I guess you have to be accurate here so that you're in time to defend your rook after rook c7. But yeah, b6, a good shot from my opponent, and I ended up taking on b6 because I knew he hadn't seen knight takes f4 yet. Otherwise, you don't really play b6, I guess. But he takes on b6, and now I do knight takes f4, which he told me he like didn't see at all. He plays queen c8, but you know, like I want a pawn, but at what cost? It's still a hard position to play. I play rook f7, getting the rook closer to the king. The issue for me is that this move knight e6 is going to be annoying a lot of the time. You know, if I just like play knight d3, knight e6, king h6, and queen f8, things are looking bad for me. But he plays queen b8, double attacking the b pawn and hitting my knight on f4. And I don't want to, but the knight has to go back to h5 pretty much. He plays rook d6, queen c4, queen d8. And here I thought for like, I had 10 minutes left and I used all my time making my last move with like 5 seconds on the clock. And the issue is white's threatening mate in 2 right here, where, you know, if I play, well, okay, mate in 3 if I do the check, and then let's say I take, well, that would lose your queen, so whatever. If I play queen a2, knight e6, obviously I don't want to sack my queen, and then queen h6 would run into queen g5. and that is checkmate. And so I tried to make a couple moves work. I looked at, what if I just play king h6 right away? And then I was like, okay, h4, that's an issue. He's going to play knight e6 still. I tried to make rook f6 work. I tried to make rook f8 work, which I knew didn't work. I tried to make knight f6 work. And what I missed with knight f6, which is the only move that works and holds balance, is that knight f6, knight e6, king h6. I forgot that the knight interfered with white's rook double attacking my knight. So white's best is something like knight f4, where I can then check and go to a square like a1 or b2, where I defend my knight and I'm holding here. I'm up a pawn, but my king's a little unsafe. So is his a little bit, but mine even more. So yeah, I just missed that knight f6 didn't lose the knight. And so I dejectedly played rook f8, seeing the line that he could go into, which is rook e6, sacking the queen. If he takes the queen, I win. But of course, he takes the rook with check, takes back. And now we've reached a losing endgame where, yes, I have a pawn, but it's over. I had also noticed that my opponent didn't notice it, but I noticed that g4 was probably an issue for me here. With my knight on a6, I noticed that g4 was probably an issue, and the engine agrees with me at a certain point. Because even though I want to, I think it was after like queen d8. Or maybe g4 instead. I noticed that this was kind of scary, but I also kind of noticed that maybe my opponent wouldn't play that. Or maybe it was earlier. I think it was here, g4. I kind of thought my opponent might not play this, though, because his king gets scary too. Lines here, queens here. But, so yeah, I played rook f8, and we got this position, which I went on to lose pretty quickly. I'm trying to hold the draw. This would be checkmate if he couldn't take my knight, but of course he could. So I play knight g7. I'm trying to, if we have a fortress here, if we actually had a fortress, but we don't. Here he could just play rook b6, which is also losing for me. Rook a7, or here you can play rook a6. I noticed rook a6 is a problem because he invades. But what he did works too. King g3, king g8, king f4, king h7, and here he simply sacrificed the rook and won my pawn, and I resigned because, what else to do? I had calculated that I am just way too slow here. So, this was, I think, my worst played game. This guy, he's a good player. He obviously had some good moves, but I thought he was a beatable opponent. And yeah, the opening didn't go well for me. I was significantly worse after knight a5, but I did battle back. So that brings us to day 2, which took place Sunday morning. Now, I'm a big football fan. As you can tell, I have a fantasy football channel too. And so I wanted to make sure I got back for the Bills game, which started at 6:30, which it was going to be on the fence for. Anyways, round 1, I'm playing a player by the name of Analia Munar Pirakul. Sorry if I mispronounced. I almost certainly did. He's a kid. He's around 1890 or so in rating. I played c4, and I don't really want to play 1800s in this. I had hoped to play 2000 plus competition, but on my first day, I ended with only half a point. So, of course, I'm going to be playing some of the weaker bottom players. c4, e5, g3, bishop c5, bishop g2, knight f6, knight f3, e4. And this is generally a mistake because you can play knight g5 and you double attack this pawn. But then bishop takes f2, and I realized that like usually the bishop's not on c5 when I play this. So now all of a sudden we're playing a game I've never played. King takes f2, knight g4, and here I thought for 30 minutes in a game 90 game. Now obviously I only have 3 moves. But what I was thinking about is, for example, king g1, queen takes g5, the point of the sacrifice. Bishop takes e4. I thought the critical line for black, and the engine agrees with me, is queen c5, where you're threatening checkmate on f2, and you're attacking the loose c-pawn. And I wasn't sure what I was going to play here, either d4 or e3. For example, d4, queen takes c4, maybe knight a3, and then you can always go back to like e6 to defend pieces and attack. And okay, I have the bishop pair. I'm down a pawn though. My king's going to be a little bit weaker. Like I'm losing by a pawn, but the game's not over. I do have a little bit of compensation for the pawn. But yeah, that was the critical line I thought. I also thought queen c5, e3, attacking the knight, takes on c4, maybe d3, but then he can play queen e6, defending his knight. And it's like, what have I achieved? Maybe I play something like king g2, rook f1 here, and I castle by hand. So yeah, I was just like, wow, I've never seen this. Again, I thought for 30 minutes. It is game 90, delay 30 though, so I do have time. I took on e4, and he castled, and I was super happy to see that because I was like, wow, this is, I mean, not challenging at all. And I mean, kind of bad awareness by my opponent. Number one, not to see queen c5. And number two, like, shouldn't you be wondering why your opponent is thinking for 30 minutes on turn 4? And I play d4 here, discovering an attack on the queen. Queen f6, threatening checkmate. Bishop f3. d6, defending the knight. Knight c3. Knight c6. And e3, defending my d-pawn. Apparently I can do this right away, but I didn't see why this, why I should give away this pawn. I felt I was like significantly better at this point, and the engine agrees with me. Queen g6, defending the knight a second time, but now I play knight d5, and you can't defend c7, and I also have ideas of b4, b5, and trying to fork the king and queen. He plays bishop f5, which is a blunder. So pause your video if you want to try to find the winning combination for white, which is knight f4. And the point is I'm attacking the queen, and I am double attacking the knight. So after queen g5, only move to keep in contact with the knight. Queen queen h6 doesn't keep in contact with the knight. Queen h5 I would take. Here I can play h4, hitting your queen. If your queen moves, I would win a piece. So he plays knight takes e3, and there's two main things to calculate here. One is bishop takes e3, and the other one is taking on g5. Taking on g5, I thought when something like takes, knight takes, and okay, I have a piece for 2 pawns, so I'm probably winning here, but these pawns are, isolated pawns. And, so I wasn't quite sure. Engine did think taking on g5 was a little bit better. The bishop takes e3 line goes like takes on g3, and then knight g2 is forced. You can't play bishop g2 because you lose your piece. So knight g2. The other thing I thought about is king f1. And I was calculating king f1, rook e8, knight h5, queen g6, rook g1, like queen here, and then like taking on g7 or something like that with one of my pieces. But this is apparently significantly worse, and actually you're losing. So happily I didn't play that. I did play instead knight g2, rook e8, and simply bishop f2. And yeah, we don't have pawns to protect our king, but we do have pieces, and the time advantage or time disadvantage I had has already evaporated. We're now pretty equal on time, which is nice because, again, I spent like 30 minutes on one move. He plays queen g6. I did originally intend h5, but But, like maybe h5, h6. But then, queen f6 is maybe annoying. So I played queen d2, bishop e4. I saw his plan too. Queen f4, h5, stopping me from playing h5. Rook h3, threatening rook g3. We're rook lifting. Takes on e4, takes with the queen. We don't want the rook to get into e2. Rook e4, rook g3, and rook g4. And here I played knight f4, which is a bit of a mistake. I had thought that, no reason to do this where then they can play g3 and attack your knight, your bishop. But yeah, no, this and then with something like queen b3 is much better for white. Where number one, we're stopping pawn g3. Number two, we've shut down the file to our king. And number three, we're attacking the loose b pawn. And, we have stuff like rook d1, rook e1, and we're just much better. And so, yeah, I should have calculated this a little bit more. I calculated knight f4, and I had missed that. I didn't calculate enough here because I missed that they could go check, which I realized after. I was like, oh, no. They go take, 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 take. Pretty much have to with all this. And then takes on d4 and take on h5. And so I do still have a piece for two pawns. But he plays rook e8, and, my rook's not getting to the e file yet. I can't play rook e1 because of knight f3, forking my king and rook. So I play knight f4, rook e4, king f2, best move, knight f5. And now, this is kind of annoying because I realize that he's going to take on h4, and if I take back, he takes my knight. So now I will only have a piece for 3 pawns, which is kind of draw. However, I have 7 minutes or so, and he has 2 minutes at this point. And I play b3 because I don't want him to win the c pawn. He takes on h4, and I played rook e1, figuring that this is harder for him to play with the pawns versus the pieces. At worst, I can sack a piece for some pawns and probably draw. And again, he has 1 minute, and I thought I'd be able to outplay him and win. White has a much stronger line, though, than rook e1. Pause your video if you want to find it. It goes knight d5, c6, knight c3, something like rook d4, knight e2, something like rook g4. And we are attacking the knight and the d pawn. We can play something like rook d1. And yeah, you're going to lose this pawn, and then we would have a piece for 2 pawns again and be winning, and our rook is more active. So yeah, this would be crushing. So a miss by me not to calculate that. But again, it's getting low on time. We're both stressed. I play rook e1, takes, knight f5, bishop f2, where my bishop dominates the knight, a5, knight d5, hitting c7, c6, knight b6, king f8, king e2, g5. And I thought g5 was a mistake. I thought g6 was a better move where you protect the knight and you don't have weaknesses. But when you play g5, now my king can get in on the light squares potentially. So king f3, f6, king g4, knight g7, knight c8, where the king can't go here, and I'm attacking here. And if you push, I'm going to take, and you have an isolated pawn. Knight e8, and here I play king f5, which is a mistake. Apparently, you need to play bishop g3 right away, threatening to take. But I first did king f5, king f7, bishop g3. So move order matters, I guess. d5, takes, and knight d6, where we trade. And yeah, now I think I've reached an endgame where I'm winning, but it's not over. It's kind of tricky. He plays b5. I play bishop c5, right? And the reason why he can't go for d4 is I simply play king e4, and you're going to, I can just blockade the pawns like this, and eventually I'll be able to go win these pawns and keep some of these pawns on and win this game. So you can't really play that. And so instead he goes b5. bishop c5, a5, bishop d4. And here he plays g4. I thought the best move for him to try is a4, because here white can blunder. Ask yourself what you would do. Pause the video if you must. What I would do is b4. And the point is, you can just keep the king out. If the king moves anywhere, we take with check and take the other one. And the king can't get in this way because our bishop and pawn keep it out. But a blunder after a4 would be to take, because now we've reached an endgame that even once we win all the pawns is a draw for black once they park their king on a8, because the bishop is the wrong color of the corner. If you're going to win a bishop and a rook pawn, this would have needed to be a dark square with me having a dark square bishop, so this would be a draw. He plays g4, though. I take king e6, king f4, king d6, f5, king c6 takes, b4. Again, my bishops and pawn keep them locked out. King e6, a4. Again, we can't take. King e5, king b5 takes, king a6, king c4, king a5, king c5 takes, king here takes. We've won the last pawn. I put him in opposition, and he now resigns. So good to get a win in round 4. And again, I was on fence playing this last game, but I figured why not? I'm going to play. I think I'll make it time to get home for the Bills game. And so round 4, the last round, round 5, I have 1.5 out of 4. A little disappointed. I drew an 1800. I mean, I didn't draw him, but my matchup is against an 1800. Again, I'm trying to play the higher rated players, but out of my control. He plays e4, c5, the Sicilian by me, knight of 3, knight c6, d4, takes with the knight, knight of 6, knight c3, d6, the classical Sicilian, and bishop g5, which is the main move, e6. And I've been doing some studying of my opening theory. I recently switched to Sicilian, so I'm really happy to get some practice in against this. Definitely not perfect against every line, but yeah, I'm learning a little bit here and there. Queen d2 with the idea to opposite side castle. a6, you want to take the b5 square away from the knight. Castles, bishop d7 is the main move played at the top level. f3, defending e4. h6, giving the bishop a kick. Bishop e3, b5, where, you know, he's going to storm me. I'm going to storm him. Takes on c6, takes on c6. g4, rook c8, just something I had seen other top players do. A good way to learn openings is to look at Grandmaster games, kind of click through a bunch and see what kind of moves they're making. Definitely not something I do enough. h4, so he's storming me. You know, I could have played bishop e7 and castled, but here I played b4, and I was debating between b4 and queen a5 and then b4. Wasn't really sure what move order. I also thought that, like, the most thematic move here is d5, where the adage goes, when you're getting stormed on a flank or attacked on a flank, you should counter through the center. d5 is also a move that you're trying to get in a lot of times in the Sicilian. The other thematic idea is the opposite side pawn storm, but yeah, d5 is the top engine move where the game could go something like knight e5, knight d7, bishop d4. And we shut down the center, but we'll probably end up playing on the queen side, maybe trading the bishop, and eventually trying to free our light squared bishop from its pawn jail right now. But that's not what I played. I played b4, knight e2, and again, I wasn't sure queen a5 first or the move that I played in the game, which is knight takes e4, exclam. So ask yourself what my plan is if you don't see it. You can also take on g4 to achieve the same idea. But takes on e4, what my plan was is if he takes the knight, I take on e4, and I'm both hitting the rook and threatening rook takes c2. For example, if the game goes rook g1, takes, 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 takes. I wasn't really sure what was happening here because bishop and rook, and then I do have a queen for 2 pieces and a rook, which 2 pieces and a rook are better than the queen. However, I also have 3 extra pawns here, which puts the favor a little bit in my camp. And also, his king's kind of weak with me trying to like, and he's not developed all his pieces yet. His knight and his bishop are kind of awkward. So, and this pawn's loose. So I wasn't fully sure what was happening here, but I figured it was probably better for me. What both me and my opponent missed is after takes on e4, he can take, and then play this move knight d4, where he defends against rook takes c2, giving me the rook, but then he can hit me with bishop takes a6, where he hits my rook. And, you know, if I defend my rook, he can win my bishop. He also has stuff like bishop b5 here. And white is apparently a little bit better. So clearly I need to study this a little bit more. When I played this move, he hit me with a, you know, obviously he was shocked to see it on the board. And so he ended up taking on b4. And the 2 main moves I calculated here are either d5 or rook b8. I figured rook b8 doesn't work due to something like queen c4, where I have 2 pieces in trouble. Can maybe even sack here. And so I played d5, and he played queen b6. And this is annoying because, I mean, I want a pawn. I gave a pawn back. I want a center pawn, though. And I want to attack his king. However, I kind of have to trade queens here because if I try to keep the queens on, he's going to just take my knight. And yeah, I don't really have a great way of attacking him. And so really nothing better to do than to take on b6. And then I played knight d6, saving my knight, d4, bishop b7, saving my bishop, keep the bishop pair, bishop d3, which I thought was a mistake. I thought he needed to play something like b3 here to prevent my knight from going to c4. But he played bishop d3, knight c4, and now you pretty much have to trade bishops because I can force a bishop trade with something like this anyways, where your bishop was trapped there. So he decides to take here, and I take with the rook. He plays c3. I play bishop d6. So I'm pretty happy at this point because even though the attack I wanted kind of fizzled, and again, I'm trying to win this game kind of quick to get home, or at least lose quick. I have the bishop pair, and so I should be better. And his pawns are kind of pushed and awkward. And my structure is more solid, right? So he plays knight c2, and I play king d7. Really no need to castle here with it being an endgame. And he plays king b1, which you usually play king b1 when you opposite side castle, but that's with the queens on the board. Really no need to play king b1, kind of a waste of a turn here. I play rook e8, preparing to play stuff like e5 one day. Bishop a5, so he's trying to put a piece on b4. I play g6 because I don't want his knight to get into the f5 square after I play e5. Bishop b4, of course, when you have the bishop pair, do not trade one of your bishops. Conversely, when you don't, do. So I play bishop f4. He plays rook d4 here, and the 2 main lines I calculated were e5, which I ended up playing. And then I was also calculating takes, e5, knight e2, d4, knight takes, bishop takes. We're against something like rook f1, maybe check, and then pick back up the knight, and who knows what's happening here. But he can play rook h3, and then, you know, check. He can go back to d3, where his rook protects it. So that would be losing for me. So I do play the best move in the end, which is e5, and takes. Now I'm hitting f3. Knight a3 is not a huge concern because I'm going to take, and I can always go back to like d5 if I needed to, but also winning this stuff. So here he plays rook d1 check, and you have to be accurate here. So ask yourself what move you would play. Pause the video if you need to at home. If you play something like king e6, you've ran into a blunder due to rook d6, where no, must go back to king e7, and then white can play rook b6 check, discovering an attack on you, and win your bishop, and you lose the game. King c7, also not a good move because they play bishop a5, king c8, and then they can go back to f1, and your rook can't make use of the d file. King c6, also not good because you've stopped your bishop from attacking the pawn. So here I played king c8, exclam, which the engine also agrees is the top move. And I thought he was going to play rook f1 here, but he plays knight e1, which I realize is a mistake because I played bishop g3, where the threat is take, take, and take. And here he plays h5, a move I had looked at, and I took, and then I took, and then I took on f3, so I've won a pawn, and bishop d6. I had calculated this. I calculated e6. Top engine move is actually f6, where you can't defend your pawn. And against something like this, I think you can now push. And you're always going to win this pawn back, right? Something like this, I don't know. So I, though, had calculated e4, bishop f4, takes on h5, takes on h6. And here I'm just up a clean pawn. But we do have opposite colored bishops, which are notoriously drawn endgames. However, I do have two connected pass pawns, which I thought would lead to a win. So here I play rook d8. Perhaps offering a trade of rooks or just trying to invade. He plays king c1. Now I play bishop g6. If he had taken the free pawn, that's not free. That would be a pin. So he plays king c1, bishop g6, rook d1, and here I have to calculate. Ask yourself what you would do. Three main moves to think about are rook takes d1, rook takes d3, or rook h8. Rook takes d1, and you have thrown away a win. This is a draw because white is going to be able to blockade you on the dark squares, and you can't make progress. You can't make these pieces move. Rook d3 is also a draw because even though you have more pawns connected now, they again blockade you on the dark squares. White needs to be accurate here, stuff like b4, so who knows, but yeah, also a draw. And so I calculated that, and I was like, nope, not doing that. I'm playing rook h8. And my plan, you will see, he plays bishop e3, rook h3, rook e1, a passive move, not what you want to do, and rook f3, where my plan was to get my rook here protected by the pawn, and then get f5, f4 to get my pawns rolling. He plays king d2, defending his bishop. I play f5. He plays rook g1. And I calculated a couple different lines here. One line I calculated was bishop e8. The other one was bishop f7. If bishop e8, rook g8, king d7, rook here, king here, rook here, bishop b5, a4, this loses the game. One line I calculated. And so I eventually settled on bishop f7, which stops the check, and rook g7. I originally was thinking I was going to play something like bishop d5, and rook a7 would lose the game for white because I can play bishop b7 and keep this rook in a cage, and then play something like king b8 and eventually sack my bishop for the rook and win his rook. But here I calculated f4. Ask yourself what's going on here. And the game ended because he took on f7, which is just a blunder because I take his bishop with check, and then he resigned once he realized that he had blundered. The engine's top move against f4 is to take, go here, play something like this, and play a 3-pawn and rook versus a bishop and 2 pawns. So this is losing, of course. And what I had calculated, I thought white's best try was something like bishop g1, e3, king e2, bishop h5, defending the rook and lining up with the king. Rook h7, and then something like rook h3, king f1. And, you know, this looks pretty crushing for black, where maybe we'll play rook h1, maybe we'll play e2, maybe play, you know, we're doing really well here. But yeah, so I ended up winning. So I ended the tournament with 2 wins on Sunday, bringing me to 2.5 out of 5, which is pretty good for playing in the top section. You know, a lot to learn from these games, a bunch of great games. I gained some rating points for my efforts. And yeah, I'm excited. I feel like I'm going to be a whole new chess player in a month from now when I keep up with the training, where my posted rating, not that high, but you can see I'm 1884 now, which again, I think I'm underrated. Like, really, at my level, and really every level below a certain point, it only takes 1 or 2 tournaments that go really well for you, where you win all your games, for you to shoot up. So I'm going to be playing this weekend. The 2 biggest tournaments I care about, or the biggest one is US Amateur Team East, which is upcoming in February. So can't wait for that. Hoping that I can win all my games for my team there and our team go on a run. And yeah, I'm going to keep up the physical training and the puzzle training. It's not super extensive, as you can tell, but want to get that baseline. And once I get in better physical shape, I think some of the time trouble issues and whatnot will take care of itself. So sitting at 1884, 120 points away from 2000. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, tell your friends. Appreciate you.